Aloha everyone and welcome to another Tinkers Academy video. I'm your host Kay Elmer and today I've got two guests with me to talk about an exciting subject. I've got Ian Mitchell of Wizard Sciences and Philipp von Holtzendorff of Leela Quantum Tech. Hey guys, how are you doing today?
Doing well, okay. Good to
All
see you.
right. So okay,
Great, thanks.
Philip. Yeah, so let me go ahead and introduce these guys to you guys. For those of you who don't know who these two incredible gentlemen are, Ian Mitchell, again, like I mentioned, he's the owner, operator, founder of Wizard Sciences. He's a incredible scientist, several patents under his belt, and he's also an aspiring German rap star, from last I heard. And he does now, and most lately, he's doing motorcycle stunts on his free time.
Yeah.
So he's an amazing person. He's a stunt man, he's a rapper, and he's a scientist and an all-around good guy. I believe he's a father of teenagers, so that might explain some of his mental lapses when it comes to motorcycle riding. And then there's Philipp von Holtzendorff, my buddy. He is an amazing person, telecom tech executive who turned into this incredible human being when abandoning the corporate lifestyle. Shaman, literally trained shaman. He's the owner operator of Leela Quantum Tech, Quantum Upgrade, and also Leela Labs. I mean, it's really interesting how you guys have a lot in common when it comes to. We all met each other, I think, through C60, our work. I mean, Ian has a C60 company, Philip has a C60 company. I'm like this C60 nerd, and that's kind of how we all met. But then you also have this really interesting link between the two of you with motorcycles, because Philip's son is, I believe, competes at a professional level or an amateur level, right, in motocross, and he has his own little experiences with stunt driving. So yeah, I was thinking between the two of you, and also Ian is now the Leela Quantum Tech Science Advisor. So I was thinking maybe if you guys ever branch out and create a subsidiary, you might want to create something for people who experience motorcycle accidents, because it seems to be something that runs in your timeline there. So, but anyway, I thought that.
Yeah.
I mean, between Philip's son and you, Ian, I think the last 12 or 18 months have been quite adventurous, and I'm glad to hear that
Yeah. That's
everybody has
very
healed
true.
up. And I'm really glad to hear that you've healed up so well, and that Philip's son is back to writing. And yeah, and if you listen to other interviews, everybody, I'm just joking around, but we're talking about Philip's son and Ian had some major accidents in the last 18 months, but everything's better now, and there was some quantum healing involved in that. So there you go. So
Yeah, a lot
everybody,
of quantum healing.
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about that when it comes to quote wound healing, right? So anyway, hey, this is part two, everybody. And so you can, there'll be a link to the part one video in the video description where we talk about in the part one, we talked about the language of quantum energy and how it's just really a new aspect to an existing science, quantum mechanics, right? And quantum healing. But when you take this traditional quantum mechanics in the physics realm and you start expanding on that into quantum biology and quantum healing and all of that, there was really, is there, and is there now? Is there language that explains what's really going on and what we're seeing in results from testing and studies? So we talked about that. We talked about how QE works at a high level, where consciousness plays into it, and then the idea of quantum entanglement, and then how to apply quantum energy to your daily life. And that you're going to find all of that in part one. And so as we kind of go through part two, we're going to be touching on some of these issues to see what the updates are. But more so, I think the very first thing, and I think the most exciting thing that I've seen in the last 12 months since our first video about the science of quantum energy is how advanced you two guys, and I just applaud you guys because you are doing something literally nobody else is doing. I can't find, and I do some deep dive searches on what are other people doing in this space, and there's like almost nobody doing anything. I mean, there's a here and there, right? But nothing like what you have done, which is you're producing actual valid response, doing double blind sham studies. You're doing all this dark field microscopy, bioenergetics, and it's just amazing what you're doing. But I'd like you, if you guys don't mind, if you can jump in and kind of talk about, like, in the last year, I think the studies or the preliminary studies, right? Either they're preliminary and they haven't been published yet, or the studies actually came out on the effect of quantum energy for autism, EMF, the effects on allergens and toxins as they relate in ATP production and wound healing. So, and just as a side note, guys, I've self-promoted myself to scribe for your work, and I created a series of videos called "The Benefits of Quantum Healing," where I'm basically reporting on the studies as they come out. So, for folks, for you guys who are interested in learning a lot about these, I do a video on each one of these things. So, but that's the new series that I've been creating since the beginning of the year. So you can find out more information there. But I got you two guys on the line. So, hey guys, what's new? What have you learned in the last year as to the science of quantum energy and what it's capable of doing? Go ahead. I just really just excited to hear what you guys are thinking.
Philip, why don't you jump in, and then I'll chime in behind, because I have my own opinion about how things have gone for the year.
Yes, sounds good. Yeah, so I mean, it's actually quite remarkable that after all the initial first results and testing and experiments and all of that, there's so much more that came out over the last year, and it just seems that as soon as there's a new research area popping up where we get some anecdotal reports from folks out of the Telegram groups or something we find out ourselves if we dive deeper into this, and there's more research facilitated, that those results are also produced. So, I mean, you listed these all of here. You mentioned the autism, the EMF, allergens and toxins, ATP production, wound healing. I mean, these are huge fields if you think about it. And if you just pick one of those, the ATP production, that's massive on its own. So, yeah, I think we find out a lot more. The last year was incredible. I think frequency medicine or quantum medicine is the future, and indeed, I think it will be a field that will grow. I want to say though that quantum mechanics has a fundamental flaw in it, and that's also it's what I see is that's why you don't see any results there from scientists that really believe in the whole quantum mechanics stuff, because it's a rabbit hole. It does not at all actually look at the reality and how it is. Quantum mechanics actually would describe the whole thing as that consciousness comes after the fact, and they also removed the ether out of the equation. I don't know how many years ago that happened, but when that happened, basically you can now not even explain things anymore in a real way. And where we pull out that energy is directly out of the ether, and we work with the consciousness field. And that is what needs to be understood, that consciousness was always the first that existed, nothing else. Consciousness is, was, and always will be, and it's the one and only thing that is always there. That is the truth. And then you can go into the next levels, and you can look at the ether model where we pull out the energy, for example. And yes, we call it quantum energy because it really is quantum energy. It's on the lowest level that you could even think of. That's why it's quantum, but it's not the quantum mechanics stuff that a lot of other people talk about. It really isn't. And I actually believe those people won't produce any results because there's a fundamental flaw in how they approach things. And that's why there's a lot of theoretical modeling going on, but they're not getting to the actual energy. And that's where there's a big difference. We're doing that. And then if we're talking about frequencies, probably later we'll get into that within the quantum field, all frequencies exist. And a frequency, though, in order to be transmitted, would need the quantum energy to be boosted. And that's I think the unique part about what we're doing really is that we've found a way on how you could transmit and transport frequencies in a way not seen before. You don't need an electrical device. You don't need to turn on a sound like a speaker in order to hear a frequency. Literally, the frequency can be vibrating in any object. And yeah, that's my quick summary. We're seeing a lot. We're very, very deep into a lot more research. We actually hired a person just a few months ago, who's now doing a lot of the groundwork on a lot more research. And then Ian, of course, is the chief science advisor, helping us a great deal. And he's instrumental in the understanding of these things, and helping to look at these human cells and what happens there. It's amazing. It's a lot of fun to work on it. And I wrap up with this here, because we're still so early that even though we're producing all of these results, and it's just so many different results in so many different fields with so many different institutes and test methods, and there's still a lot of people out there that either haven't heard about it, or that they can't wrap their head around it because it's so not mainstream. We haven't heard about it, and it brings us back to, okay, so if you think about the early times of the internet, you wouldn't think that something like that is possible. And even if you go back 200 years and then tell people, Ian brought that up, how cell phones work, you can't really imagine how that works until it works. And this is the same thing with this technology.
Oh yeah, no,
Well said.
yeah, totally. I mean, so okay, I won't get a million questions, but Ian, so what's your take on because I guess the thing we talked about in part one, which was we can't explain exactly what's going on, but we can prove it does something, and then now we've got a year of studies right under our belt that says this is the something it's doing, right? And then in terms of like explaining, like, okay, well, why do you think, or what are these results coming from? I mean, what would be, what's your take on that?
Ask the question one more time. You broke up for just a second.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, the question really is like, hey, you know what? We, in the last video, right? We talked about, like we don't really have and even in your other interviews, right? It's basically we don't know the exact mechanics of how quantum energy is doing what it's doing, but it's doing something. So because of the result, you know that it exists, and you can validate that there's something there. And in front of us right here on the slide is this is what's happening. We've got some amazing things that are happening that nobody before us or before you has ever been able to produce, which is, hey, I'm increasing ATP production by using this quantum entanglement, service by sending, energy from another distance. I mean, that's kind of unheard of, right? Same thing with mitigating the effects of allergens. So, so the question is like, we're these amazing results, and then so like how, like what do you think now, a year later, that you're seeing these results? Have you been able to kind of figure out, what's really the driver, behind all this? I guess to Philip's, credit, it's about consciousness, but what's your take on how these things are, why is this happening, and how are we getting these results?
Well, so I think over the past year we've definitively done some really good tests, and also have done them in triplicate, with the actual test being run in quadruplicate. So we've done the same experiment 3 different ways to drill down and identify things, and do it in a double-blinded fashion. And I think the biggest change is that with the data we have, we can now effectively say, yeah, this is sort of the smoking gun of quantum biology. We can repeatably show with tremendous statistical significance that we are eliciting big jumps, to the tune of 20 to 26% increases in ATP production remotely using quantum energy. And do it over and over, and we can prove it over and over. And I think this is part of the technological curve. We're drilling down farther and farther, but it reminds me of Faraday playing with magnets. There's a lot of work that has to be done just to figure out the interactions, which is where we are now. And then after we've started to codify it, which is what we're just starting to do, then I think we'll start adding different descriptors to the lexicon so that we actually do have kind of one language that we can all speak to. Because Philip is exactly right. And the thing that's the most amazing about the way things have played out over the past year in terms of what assessments you can make by looking at the data sets that we've received from all the experimentation. And the thing that is most profound to me is that it's clear that there is an underlying intelligence that connects everything. It would be impossible for the data sets to express the way they have without, in a double-blinded fashion, without fully acknowledging, turns out there is in fact something that connects all things regardless of distance. And I don't know that we, other than calling it, consciousness or something like that, I don't know that we're really pegging the terms yet. But we have definitively made strides in the mechanisms and the mechanics and how it's functioning, and being able to identify that, yes, there is some underlying connectivity between all things. That's monumental, because the implications of being able to see huge jumps, relevant statistically, in cell cultures, performed by a non-perceptible energetic function 7,000 miles away, which we've done multiple times now, it's brilliant. It's paradigm shifting. And part of the reason I personally love this is because you actually have to think as you're doing this, because sometimes the data is bizarre. It doesn't make sense with what we've traditionally been taught. But again, if you look at things and say, consciousness is the epiphenomenon, it's the outcropping of, awareness, and that's the, after you have a brain, I don't actually think you can solve these puzzles. To Philip's point, I think you literally have to say, okay, we're looking at it with blinders on, kind of almost in reverse. We don't see the whole picture. We see a very narrow band, and we're looking at it from the wrong end. If you look at things and approach it from the standpoint of consciousness is the preeminent function here, the connectedness between all things, and then the expression of those things through awareness, that's when things get interesting. And of course, tend, as we all are, towards going, well, okay, how does it work? Then that's, I think, when you get into the vibratory component of things, where we're trying to actually skew vibrations, which we can measure, to express certain functions. So kind of a long-winded answer for what's been happening, but we are drilling down, but we're still in the experimental phase. So I think more time is what I'd like, but I'm tickled pink with the results, because they really are sort of the smoking gun that says, yeah, so everything's connected. That's just the way it is. We can now start trying to deal with it rationally and go, okay, well, it turns out we weren't right. We need to rewrite what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, just flat out, everybody who's listening to this, the results from the studies are just absolutely amazing and remarkable. So it's good to hear that, the more studies you do, right, the better you get at doing studies on quantum energy. But in terms of, if I'm just paraphrasing, but in terms of the language and the actual definition of the mechanics of what's happening, that's still, still out there to be determined. But in terms of the data sets coming from all these studies, I'm just kind of curious if you thought about feeding them into like a Chat GPT-4. I think we lost Ian. Philip, do you
No,
see
I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Wow. Go to meeting showing you left. Okay. No, thank God you're still here. So, but it's like, have you ever thought about that? Like taking all of these results and feeding it into ChatGPT-4 and saying, hey, what do you think? What do you think would happen?
Well,
Out of curiosity.
so I could not tell you what happens because I haven't spent enough time to actually look into ChatGPT. I mean, I've been following this, and I have some rudimentary knowledge about it, but we would definitely need some help of someone to get this actually done. Yeah, and why not actually?
I'm just throwing that out there because I've been I kind of follow what's been going on. It's gotten really really blew up this spring, and but there's been several articles and stories about doctors and scientists who've done just that. They've taken a body of information, fed it into the AI, and the AI is like now designing new pharmaceuticals, for example. to do different things. So it's kind of real interesting on what that technology can do. Not GPT-3, but definitely GPT-4 probably could be more beneficial in that line. But I'm just curious because that seems to be the hot topic of the day. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. So the more studies we're doing, the more we're learning how to do studies and the more data we're getting that gives us more like data points, right, for eventual conclusions. That's great. So that's what's happening new. And if you guys, anyone out there listening, if you're interested in the studies, you can find them on the website, and you can find the video series on my YouTube channel. Okay, so in the light of like what's new, we've done a bunch of studies. We're gaining in knowledge, but what are we learning? So here's some questions that as I listen to your interviews, with various personalities. And by the way, your guys' Luke Story interview is awesome. When the two of you guys met with him, and so one of the questions I have is like. And I get this in the Telegram chat group too. Is like, have you guys done any studies, or what is your opinion and or findings for how long do these effects last? Like, for example, I know from talking with you, Philip, a couple of years ago when you launched your EMF jacket, you mentioned that you guys found out that if you wear the jacket, the effect of the jacket is has a benefit to the blood microscopy, and then if you took the jacket off, that effect would last for at least 4 hours, for example. So what about these other effects? Like the ATP production. I guess the experiment was you set the participants up on a U subscription for quantum upgrade, and then you saw the impact of that subscription or the energy being sent to them via entanglement. Then you saw the ATP go up, right, in the cell cultures. But how long does it last? That's the question. I mean, if you turned it off, or let's say took your hand out of a block, or you walked away from a block field, have you guys really been able to determine the lasting effects?
So energetically, it's about 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours that after, let's say, either you've had your hands in the block or you're using the quantum upgrade. Let's say you're using it at 800 on the Hawkins scale, as an example, and then you turn it off. Then it kind of dissipates over like a 2 hour period, maybe even up to 3 hour period, and you would still have lasting effects beyond that. You wouldn't have this extra energy boost anymore. You wouldn't feel that, but certainly your body functions are not going back to before right away, which is different for ATP production and the blood and HRV, for example, because what we need to understand is that this pure quantum energy field, what it does is it brings you into your center, and it supports the optimal state, right? That's what it promotes. And while you can increase ATP production, like we've been shown, I think we're all in agreement that it wouldn't do that over a very long period of time, just run at higher ATP production, because that may not even be good if it did that, right? Because you need to have a balance still in your body. However, with the blood, it's something that this would last for quite some time, but it's impossible to say. I don't think we can even answer that question even in the future, because everyone is so different, and it's so different what do you do afterwards, right? If you drive off and you sit under a 5G tower afterwards, right after the treatment, you're going to have a completely different reversal that happens way faster, as if you go out and, I don't know, sit in the forest at a lake, with no cell reception, and you're just having a great day meditating there. You're going to be keeping these results for way longer. So I don't think we'll be able to answer the question.
Okay,
I can jump in with, one interesting bit of data on the wound healing experiments, and we're literally, we've been going through these right now, actually, for yesterday and today. One of the more interesting things is when we structured the experiment, we would set up cells on a plate, right? So a petri dish, and then you scrape them, so you actually make a cut through the center of them that's about 10 microns wide, and then you put it under a microscope and you track how long it takes for the cells, in this case human dermal fibroblasts, so skin cells, to actually grow back and become confluent, to cover the surface of the petri dish again. So what's kind of intriguing is that we would charge the cells while they were healing in certain dishes and not in other dishes, and the wound healing is much more rapid, ballpark say twice as quick in the cells that are exposed to the quantum energy. Now, after the first pass of this, where we would take all the pictures with the microscope on the cuts and look at the relative healing rates, we would do another pass with a secondary scrape while the cells weren't being charged. And every time, the cells in the wells that had received the quantum upgrade prior to outpaced the cells that hadn't again. So the effect persisted for, in this case, at least 2 extra days just in a cell culture. That made a statistically significant increase in the rapidity of the wound healing. So I can't say beyond that, but I can definitively say, we have data showing at least an uptick of lasting over 2 days after being taken out of the field. So
and that's an amazing data point. That is absolutely an amazing data point.
Wow.
And so I think what this shows is, so because we know that, after, what I said, 2-3 hours or so, the field wouldn't really be recognizable anymore, right? Energetically. So if you turn it off, and then 2-3 hours in the field, you couldn't measure it anymore. You couldn't observe it anymore. But it seems that the cells or the physiological organism got so much stronger during the charging process that these strengthening effects last, obviously for these cells here for at least these 2 days, and it'd be great to see in other experiments how long that lasts. But that's how I see it, right? I mean, would you agree that that's like a strengthening effect that is lasting?
Oh yeah, 100%. That's what's so remarkable about it is we can't. I can't identify anything that morphologically, in terms of the shape of the cells, I can't identify anything that's changed from the time when they were charged to the time when they're not charged. But what I can tell you is, relative to the control group, they still so greatly outperformed it that it's an obvious persistent effect, and something is fundamentally altered. And like you said, Philip, it could be that, when we start drilling down on methylation pathways and looking at the genomics of the thing, we can identify how it's methylating or not methylating in those cells, and look at, effectively the health and the age of the cells, to say, yeah, okay, so giving it quantum energy for 2 days while we're doing the first round of wound healing will increase its effectiveness, and actually kind of come out with a curve, because there does appear to be a declination, some sort of decline in the graph when you look at the fullness and the rapidity of the wound healing. So it's not as strong, but it's still stronger than a normal cell. And like you said, it could well be that it's just restructuring the cells internally and giving them more oomph so that their processes are better, and because we know that the ATP levels have gone up. So the corollary, or the correlation there, is the rapidity of the wound healing. Again, how long that will be persistent, we don't know, but you're exactly right in your assessment there. It's very conclusive that it has fundamentally changed the cell function.
Yeah, it's interesting, because if you're getting that type of wound healing results, it sort of reminds me of the same results that people are getting using PMF or microcurrent on wounds, rapid or expedited healing, and in that regard, right, as you know, Ian, is that the current replicates the energy of the body's meridians, and it does 2 things, right? It mitigates the inflammation response and then goes straight into healing, as opposed to swelling up really tight and then obviously creating a barrier for the body to heal. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. So the quantum's doing the same thing. but maybe working in a different way by actually changing the cell dynamics itself, which leads to the other question.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. I was just going to say that from personal experience in my, my Evil Knievel days of yore, uh, 7 months ago when I completely broke myself on a motorcycle, the wound healing, in terms of the actual wounds and, my tibia being inside of my femur, which is not where it belonged, um, the pace of healing was greatly altered. Now, I used the quantum block, quantum upgrade. I used pulsed electromagnetic field, C60, lasers. I did a whole host of modalities to hasten the pace, but the initial prognosis was 12 weeks with no pressure on my leg whatsoever, and multiple surgeries with plates and pins and screws being put in. At the end of the day, I had no surgery, no plates and pins. Everything moved back into position. The wounds healed and the bones mended entirely to a point of getting an all clear from the orthopedic surgeon in 9 weeks, as opposed to 12 weeks before I could put any pressure on the leg whatsoever. So I was up and walking and done. Yeah, well, and that's, it, personally speaking, it was profound. And, I know that all of those different modalities had different effects because, when you're laying there and the only thing you're doing is perceiving what your physical form is kind of doing and how it's moving and how it's repairing, you become acutely aware of what is and is not working. And you can feel, and this is totally subjective, but you can feel the effects of the quantum field and how it manipulates your biology. I mean, we've shown that with allergies, and Philip, you can talk about the allergy studies because those are equally as brilliant in terms of the real world application.
Yes, I mean, okay, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah. I mean, to me, of all the things you guys are doing, that one, that one is the most unbelievable. Because of the ramifications of what it means, given our current environment that we live in, where everything is poisonous to us, and what those allergen tests are coming out, the results, if you expand on like what's capable, in other words, I've really thought it through, and I'm like, wow, man, if this is really happening, and it is, what does that mean to everything about the idea that our environment's poison to us? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and you're right. I want to be very mindful with that topic, obviously, but it could have some really, really positive implications on a much broader scale than we can imagine. Because you're right, we're living in a toxic soup, right? Wherever we look, we get it out of the air, we get it out of the food, we get it out of the water. There's just toxins, and the body has to do just a lot of big work to fight that off. And with that, apparently, there's a tool now that can ease these things and that can take off stress response, by 65 to 100% in the cases that have been measured so far. And for the people that haven't heard about that, we've done these experiments even live on stage at the biohacking conference, and there's a clinic in Germany that has been running a study. They did a pilot, and now they're running a larger study. It's taking unfortunately longer than expected because they don't have tons of these patients, and so they can only conduct another experiment when they also have a patient with a food allergy. So yeah, and everything points to that. It's just we need to be very careful with claims in this regard, because we just really want more data points that we can accurately give some guidance.
Yeah, no, I totally.
But it's even with various methods, right? I mean, it's what the Besa Institute already found 2 years ago, frankly, right? I mean, they have a different testing method, and Kay, you understand that testing method more than most people. It's an amazing testing method, but I don't think it's enough, for us to go out and say, this is really what it does in that regard. But yeah, everything that has been tested so far with different methods points to that. And I think by the end of this year, we probably have a lot more data points and can be more open with guidance.
Yeah, in that regard, do you guys have anything planned to do a lab, a lab level test of allergens and toxins on human bodies in terms of like histamine response or inflammation response to stimuli? Are you guys planning anything like that? So, take it outside of the bioenergetics world, which is a bona fide, reputable world, right? Meridian stress assessments, the key term there. But in terms of like literally being able to go into the body and measure the before and after histamine levels, right, from someone who's, let's say, allergic to a particular substance, and actually, measuring it at the, in a lab. Are you guys got anything planned for that?
I would love to do that. I just
Yeah.
I would have
I
to
know.
refer to Ian if he has an idea or any contact
Yeah,
in that regard.
I do actually. It's I had done some study a few years back in a clinical trial on mice where I looked at cytokine levels. And one of the experiments that I want us to do before the end of the year, and I actually just got numbers on how to do this, um, is to run a cytokine assay on people's actual blood, both before and after being exposed to the quantum upgrade, so we can see what the actual changes are. Now, granted, it's still downstream effects. I mean, all of the things we're looking at are secondary functions. They're not, we unfortunately don't have a quantumometer yet and can't read the effectiveness of the quantum field as it expresses in an organism. But we do have really awesome tools for blood work, and we can very definitively say, you had a histamine reaction at this level, you had a cytokine reaction at this level, this cytokine, cratered, IL-6 went down, IL-8 went down. Those are the kind of things that we can look at, and before the end of the year, I think we actually will have that completed. Because again, though it's not terribly popular, it's a great test, and you can actually see the physiological effects. And to your point, Kay, I think a lot of times things are more believable for the average person when they move out of the electrical field, because still, even though people talk about it and use it all the time, electricity and, electrical fields and electromagnetic fields, it's all sort of ethereal and ephemeral, and people can't really grab it. Whereas blood work, everybody's pretty familiar with blood.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. So I think kind of, yeah. I mean, to me, I think the cool factor is when we can actually measure the, like those cytokine and histamine reactions, pre and after exposure to an allergic substance or any kind of toxin. Because where I'm going with this is just like, because one of my things about helping and advising people on Telegram constantly, in the Telegram chat groups, is it's just like it's just instructions and guidelines. Like the quantum energy, how long does that last? Then translates to, hey, this is how you use these tools for quantum healing. Like like Philip, you had that good, that wasn't a good example, a horrible example, where your son broke both of his wrists. But now, based on your experience, that's what I'm actually telling people is, hey, try this. I think it was 15 minutes a day in an eye block, twice a day, right? And he did that, and that it cut his healing time in half, right? His recovery was cut in half. Is that correct? And, so I always
Yes,
tell,
pretty much,
so
yes.
that's the example that I give people. I go, well, when Philip's son broke his wrist, this is what he did, and his recovery time was cut in half. So that's kind of like start with that, and I think that's where it's really going to be incredibly helpful, from guiding people on how to use the tools, based on what we're learning about how long stuff lasts, and then in terms of like, especially like how long, like I think the first allergen test, right, was like you determined it's like 4 minutes in an eye block would transmute, right, the substance to not be, a trigger to the individual that was exposed to it. So we know now. So now I tell people, hey, 4 minutes in an eye block, generation 1 minimum. That's the
Yes.
minimum. And then put that food in there. And I've done my own test with my own eye block. I'm allergic to MSG. I break out in hives, and I had the exact same results that Todd did before and after. So it's pretty. So it's pretty to me, it's duplicatable. You can duplicate it. That means it's definitely real. And then now it's like, okay, creating those guidelines on how to use these tools to actually get into like healing modalities and instructions and procedures. So yeah, great stuff. Because honestly, if this does what I think it really does, um, then really just trying to make sure people understand that people who want to live healthy, put your food and water in this thing before you digest them, and then of course knowing how long that lasts. Like we get a question a lot in the block, and I'm sorry, in the Telegram group. Maybe one of you guys can answer this, but people are saying, well, I'm charging water. How long does the charge last in the water? Because I charge a pitcher at a time, and I don't drink the whole thing, obviously, right then and there. But like how long does that energy last in the water, or do I charge my food, right, put it away, and then cook it and eat it, and does it still carry that energy by that point? 2 weeks away from now, or a week from now, or if I freeze, if I freeze my food, should I, when should I charge it, and so that I get those effects, right, of basically toxin mitigation and so forth. And so what I've been trying to tell people, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you guys could both comment on that, because really big issue, right, for everybody. I think that people are investing so much capital into buying these incredible tools. They're not free, they're not cheap, but they're so valuable. I mean, I look at it like a complete investment in your health and your well-being. So could you two kind of comment on that? Like, because what I tell people is like, hey, just to be safe, you can't go wrong, just charge it before you eat it. Right? Instead of charging your groceries and then putting them away. So what do you think about food, and what do you guys think about water in terms of like what would you recommend to people for the best effect?
So it's hard to tell, but we know that the energy gets out of the water again over time. Even frequencies lose efficacy, and that can, yeah, we can't tell at this point how long that actually takes, because also there the environment and the circumstance matters. Again, you can take a glass of water, you charge it, and then you put it underneath a 5G tower, right? And I don't know, do other things to the water that aren't helpful, or you put the water in a really great environment and let it sit there. So it totally matters. I would say with everything that is not very dense, like groceries, fruits, vegetables, um, sugary items, water, etc. If you have these sensitivities, then definitely I would recommend to charging all the stuff before you consume it, and not the moment you purchase it. Meaning that if you purchase it and you charge it and then you put it in the fridge for 2 weeks and then you consume it, you don't have the full effect anymore. You may still have some effect, and you most likely you will have some effect. I mean, we actually know that because we tested that with a professional fitness bar producer who's about to use our technology to charge their bars. So we know that there's also a lasting effect, but again, there's a difference between the everyday regular person that doesn't have sensitivities and one that does. How long exactly that lasts in the water, we can't tell. I would say, the charge, once you've charged water, it probably you'll have some charge at least for a day, but already after 15 minutes, if it's in an open glass exposed to oxygen, you probably, yeah, you start losing it already after 10 minutes gradually.
Okay,
I don't know,
I
if you have
would
any
add
more
in,
thoughts.
yeah, and this is of course probably sort of the mad scientist approach here, but it's a really simple experiment to kind of dial in and see in your environment, because it really does change from environment to environment. And, obviously it changes even in that environment, as Philip was alluding to, with interactions with, electromagnetic fields and, like what kind of 5G is being pumped through there. Do you have smart meters and all that sort of stuff? But simple experiment that's kind of interesting is you can take a piece of fruit, like an apple, something that you're used to seeing a certain oxidation pattern on, and either put one entire apple in a block next to another apple that isn't in a block, and then slice them open and look at their rates of oxidation, just basically how long it takes for them to turn brown. And you'll actually see a difference in reduction oxidation potential between the one that is charged and the one that is not charged after just a couple of minutes in a block. Like visibly, you'll see a difference. And we can actually, and Kay, I don't know if I sent this to you, but we did this with vitamin C and showed that even though the compound spectroscopically was identical and it came from the same vial, after a few minutes in a quantum block, the same compound started expressing an entirely different reduction oxidation potential.
Wow.
You know, yeah, and it's literally just 4 minutes.
Unheard of. that's
yeah,
a breakthrough
I'll
right
send
there.
you. Yeah, I'll send you that data because it's a compelling image, because in one set you see that they're identical, and then the same compound taken from the same vial put into two little beakers was then, you know, exposed and unexposed, and then rerun for reduction oxidation potential, and it's entirely different.
That's amazing. That's actually my next question. But just real quick to anybody out there, I mean, when people come onto the Telegram chat group and they say, "Well, how do I'm trying to convince my spouse that I didn't waste my money," you know, and it really does work. How do I prove it to my spouse, right? And the first thing, the common thing is like, well, just get some cut flowers. 100% of the time, the cut flower thing. I think that just ties right to it, right? You take cut flowers, same vase of water, split it into two. Split those flowers into two, but take one vase and charge the water in the vase. And those flowers will last longer than the other one that didn't get charged, and they will wilt and die while the other ones are still vibrant. So, and we've got lots of pictures on the Telegram chat group of just people doing that, and it's pretty cool. But yeah, so it's exactly the same thing. So where that leads, though, and this is something you've mentioned in a couple of times in a couple of your interviews, Ian, with other folks, was you'd mentioned the term transmutation and waveform. So is that what could you kind of explain, like, okay, so you take, like you just said, you take vitamin C, and then vitamin C does X, Y, Z, right, when it goes into the body. But then you put it you expose it to quantum energy, either, quantum upgrade, or you put it in a block, and then it now expresses a different set of attributes. And you kind of alluded to the idea that the waveform, or it's transmutated. But could you kind of expand on that? Like, what's the actual, like, science mechanics going on with, why is this even happening? Like, how can something all of a sudden do something different that it's not known to do?
Well, okay, so if the simplest way to think about it is to look at something inside a box, and I always say, science is a point on a line, and we're just trying to move the point farther into the future with better data, better testing, and then hopefully better tools over time, so we can actually have analytical equipment to do a lot of this stuff and provide us with insights. So in this case, what I mean is fundamentally compounds are atoms, right, that have aggregated in a certain fashion. And all of those things are vibrating bits of things that come together. So there's a certain waveform that's expressing itself with everything, people, rocks, water, everything. It's all things coming together that are fundamentally really more vibratory in nature than solid, tangible things. They're more like vibrating energy than solid, tangible things. We perceive them as solid, right? Like we very convincingly express solidity, but you're never actually touching anything. You're just pushing on something's electron cloud. So there's just a repulsive force when you feel pressure on something. It's not actually touching you. That said, all of those things that are expressing those electromagnetic forces are waveforms, very complicated waveforms. And when you expose them to quantum energy, it manipulates them and changes what's happening in a vibrational fashion, right? So the vibratory field that's coming off of those things is different. Now, how I can say that definitively is the test that I just forwarded the images from the data sets over to Philip, so he could send them to you, and you can actually look at them and see this. When you look at a spectral analysis of this compound, it's vitamin C, right? So, or in this case specifically, it was ascorbic acid. So we're looking at this, and it has one expression, which means the molecules in the configuration that we call them ascorbic acid have this certain frequency and this certain potential. We modify their exposure to a quantum field, and suddenly they no longer have the same potential. Now, structurally, it looks as if it's the same molecule. Nothing has changed conformationally. It's not twisted differently. But in terms of what it's expressing when it interacts with other molecules, it's fundamentally different. So the component that we can alter there is something having to do with vibration and or spin of the actual subatomic particles and how those react. And the analogy that I've probably used before is if you fill a suitcase with gyroscopes and you're running down a hall and all of them are just sitting there loose, you can run and zigzag and turn left and right and do whatever you want. If, however, you get all of those gyroscopes in the briefcase spinning in the same direction and same orientation, and you run down the hallway and then try and take a turn at a 90-degree angle, you'll be lifted off of your feet because of the conservation of angular momentum that's being expressed on those gyroscopes. You can't move it that way. It simply won't function that way. And likewise, by analogy, we can say, okay, we're seeing this happen in subatomics, which is obviously cascading up to atomic things and then to molecular things, because we know that it's reacting differently. We can't really see inside of the black box just because we don't have the analytical tools to do that yet. You know, we can just say, this is the molecule, this is how it's supposed to express. Now we can say, well, this is the molecule under exposure to quantum energy. It can actually express under this condition or this condition or this condition, but they are fundamentally different than when it's not exposed to quantum energy. So again, we're still kind of taking pot shots, if you will, at trying to hone in what we're doing. We can say definitively it happens. We can repeat it every single time. We will get the same data, but we just aren't quite fine enough. The granularity, we're not there yet, but we're close enough that we can tell you it is happening and give you some idea of how. Now, and admittedly, though, I will say, since you can't look the answers up on Google, this is our best assessment of what is transpiring. Now, more likely than not, a couple hundred years or 1,000 years from now, if people look back at this and they kind of say, oh, you know, these guys were basically just on the cutting edge of something and they were playing with what is, maybe equivalent to magnetism. Here's how it actually functions. They thought it functioned like this, and they built all these cases that would, say it can function like this, which is exactly what we're doing. It's kind of the scientific approach to this is we see the data, we surmise what has to happen, we do tests to see if that fits the conditions. We've been doing that, and it's working. So we're assuming that it's moving in one of a couple of different directions, and that's why it's happening. But truly, do we know? No, like I said, we don't have a quantumometer yet, so we can't directly measure it. We can only indirectly measure it and then surmise what we think is happening based on all of the data that we get.
Yeah. Yeah, just want to. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're onto the right thing though when you mentioned that in an interview, and I've really started to try to figure out are there other people working on that, and I did find a quantum engineer working at UCLA that's building technology that that can try to measure some of these changes, and what that person's finding is that within the exposure to a weak magnetic field, that they're also seeing changes and transmutation of substances and how they react to the biologicals. So there's a distinct relationship between quantum biology. We are biological and we're quantum beings, and then the actual application of the quantum energy to the substances that interact with us. And there's this other term that I discovered. I don't know if you ever heard this term, but the term called spin chemistry has come into play as well. With when the electron starts spinning in a different direction or a different vibration, it changes what that molecule, that atom will do, and then of course the molecule itself. So, yeah, it's out there, but again, you guys are so far ahead of the leading edge, and there's very few people working on it. But I think you guys are definitely onto something, and it's going to be really exciting to see where it goes from here. And just starting with like what can it do. But okay, so I forgot to ask you guys, do you have a hard stop? Like what time? Like right now, I got 12:15 CST. I mean, how many more minutes do I have of your time?
I can go for probably another 20 minutes.
Okay. All right. How about
Maybe it's
Philip?
15.
Okay, so we'll stop in 15 then. Okay, thank you guys. All right, so I'm going to just start skipping over some of my questions. I have so many questions for you. It's such a rare treat to have you guys on the line. But so let's talk about something else though in terms of frequency. This is something that, again, that you haven't. I haven't seen any studies coming out with you. You know, either one of you kind of. I'm sure you have, but you just haven't published anything. But you know, like, can you talk about like how do frequencies play into this? Because it seems like all the results so far is just pure quantum energy does X, Y, Z, right? All these different amazing things. But what about the frequencies? Are you guys planning to do anything? Have you done anything? Like, you know, where does the frequencies play into this?
Well, I'll start with that maybe because there indeed have been studies in regards to frequencies um,
Okay.
already by the EGIF Institute and also by BESA, specifically where they looked at the so-called HEAL frequency.
Right.
And there's just a couple others that we've done. But you're right, there's a lot more to be done. So here's how that works. So all frequencies exist within the quantum field. There's not a single frequency that doesn't exist within in the quantum field. And if we want a frequency to be transmitted, whether that is through the quantum upgrade or you know, you have a carrier like a card and you want this frequency to be transmitted, it needs quantum energy to do that. So that's kind of like the carrier mechanism. And that's what I call frequency medicine, right? And there's other frequency medicines out there, right? Because, you know, there's stuff that Sherry Edwards is doing, for example, with sound frequencies. That's also, I would also call that frequency medicine. And then you have, you know, Rife machines and things like that. It's just they're all different mechanisms. With the frequencies, if we add those, we can amplify results on top of what we're seeing with just the pure quantum energy. And it depends on the use case. So what we're guessing at this point, and we'll be able to validate that hopefully still this year, that if we added the heal frequency to the wound healing experiment, that the results will be even better. That is currently we very much believe that that is going to be the case. And there's actually, not only our so-called healers seeing that, but we even have a mutual friend, Todd Shipman, that it may go too far to get into that, but there was a very, very interesting thing that they noticed once he turned on the heal frequency and the quantum upgrade. So we're estimating that you can increase that. Now, with something like sleep, again, I don't want to get into a claim, and I'm not making a claim here yet, but the assumption right now is if you turn on the inner peace frequency, that it will aid you with your anxiety levels, which can and should be measured in regards to the HRV and even, you know, sleep parameters. So that's pretty much how that works. But the thing is that we're still so early on, and there's still so much that we want to show and want to find out that we can't. We're probably spread too thin in order to test all these different frequencies at the same time. So what we're doing is, and I think it's the right approach, to figure out what can the basic system do and achieve, and then once we have all that data, you know, we can gradually move into, you know, adding these specific frequencies. And the thing is always, like, we know already what those frequencies do, and certainly the people also want to know. Like, we give them the best idea about all of that. But yeah, some more scientific testing, I think, will definitely be done in regards to the frequencies. Sure.
Cool. So, Ian, are you playing around with any of that, or have you tried?
No, we really kind of where we are is just identifying the broad strokes. Now, some of it, obviously, just because we're always tinkering with this, no pun intended with deference to your show. One of the things that you can't help but notice is there are, and of course there are, all anecdotal things, N of one kind of stuff that comes through, but we hear a lot of stuff, and I personally know a lot of people where, just like Philip was saying, where they do things and go, hey, here's a strange effect that seems to be consistent. And so those are all things that relate to specific frequencies, not just exposure to an eye block or something like that. And so, yeah, I'm kind of tinkering with it just on the periphery. It hasn't been the focal point of any of the studies or data yet. And I think realistically, it'll probably be the very end of this year before we really start queuing that up, or kind of in one of the repeat performances of the wound healing experiment, where we actually do what Philip was just saying, and we do the experiment again, because the first 3 times we did that experiment, it was kind of a process of refining things to isolate for variables, make sure that everything was good, and then continue to do it in quadruplicate so we could actually see with, have statistical error bars and really isolate all the effects and make sure that what we were seeing is what we thought we were seeing. And in some cases it wasn't initially, and then over time everything got really tightened up. But I think we will likely do that same experiment again, since we're quite adept at it now, and have everything set up, in terms of microscopy to track all the imaging. Because you literally take hundreds of pictures to track those, to look at the growth cycles. So yeah, we'll likely do the experiment for wound healing this year, towards the end of the year, with the heal frequencies, and see what kind of what rapidity or decrease occurs from that, or rather what increase or decrease occurs from that. So
Okay.
we shall see.
So yeah, no, yeah, totally. I think that's the interesting thing. I feel like while you guys were talking, I'm thinking, if you think about the idea of transmutation and spin, electron spin, transmutation of the electron spin, and that's what's causing these physiological changes, and when it interacts with quantum biology, right? What happens when you add a frequency to that? Do you actually then get it to transmutate, but then it entrains to the frequency? So it's kind of like transmuting even more into something completely different than just energy itself, and then it creates a different effect. So that might be an answer there. But yeah, I'm doing my own little experiments all the time too, and I only work with plants. I don't want to have a bunch of mice here, but it's I definitely want to. I'm following along the same lines, just doing what I can as an armchair scientist, tinkerer. Okay, so yeah, so I think that's the thing. So for folks of you out there wondering how these things work, it's all about, I think Nikola Tesla best said it. I said it the best. Is, I'm going to misquote him here, but I think he said, if you want to understand the universe, you have to understand vibration and frequency. And I think he was right. So there you go.
Yeah, I think he was right too.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that. Yeah. It comes down to that, right? So the last set of questions before I let you guys go is the role. Now, this has come up. It was interesting though when you first launched the products, Philip. It was really focused. There's so much attention on the idea of intentions and consciousness, and then it's like 3 years later, and even though it's kind of talked about, it's not as as profound as a topic in the group, but. But I think for the most part, nothing has changed, right? In terms of how our thoughts and intentions actually affect those results. Because I know that happens in science, right, Ian? That there's been plenty of experiments.
The double slit experiment.
Right. It's like, it depends on who does the experiment. It comes out different because that person's mentality of the day. And even like I think one of you guys told me once a long time ago, when you're making your Philip, it was you. When you're making your C60, you have to be of calm mind and presence, right? Because whatever your emotional state is going to go into that C60 oil, and your product will not be the best it can be. And I think that was you telling me that a long time ago. So I know that our thoughts and our intentions are driving results. So can you guys elaborate on that? Like, okay, people have the upgrade, especially the upgrade, because I think it's a little different than the block. Because when you're using a block, you're placing an intention in a block, right? Because you've got the source of the energy right in front of you, and you're putting it in. We're basically at the headwaters, right? But when you've got the upgrade, how do you use the and energy is being sent to you from a source? You know, where do thoughts and intentions play on those lines in terms of
Yes.
driving
So
results?
I try to explain. So there's some things to unpack. So first of all, this stuff works regardless of any thoughts and intentions. So you don't have to believe that it improves your blood. For example, it just does that, right?
No.
It just has a certain effect. You know, like with that apple, for example, that, you know, you don't have to think that the apple will do that, and the apple will just do that
Yeah.
anyway. So that happens. However, um, in general, we know that if we think something, if we have a certain intention, that gets amplified. It gets amplified even more when there's a strong, pure quantum energy field available, because that's just the nature of the field, right? So you can further amplify the results by putting these intentions in, by thinking this, you know, with a quantum block or the infinity block. You know, you could even put a piece of paper with that intention into the block. We know that. So I would always encourage people to still watch their intention and to play with those, because you can further amplify results. With the quantum upgrade, so if you have the field for you, for example, then at this point it's not possible to add specific intentions to that, though we have the idea to actually add that. So I think maybe by the end of this year, we'll have the opportunity that people can put in a specific intention and add it to the quantum upgrade, which will be really cool. It's basically then um, an additional feature, you know, next to the frequencies, right, that you can add right now. So at this point, you would just want to have these intentions internally. That's the only way on how you can do it, which is wise to do, right? I mean, I
Okay.
think in life in general, it's good to work with intentions.
So, Ian, are you okay? Thank you, Philip. Okay, good advice. So, from a science perspective, Ian, um, in terms of driving results, have you actually done have any of your studies, you know, utilized that as an attribute, as a variance? And then, if not, you know, what are your thoughts on doing that and trying to get best results?
Well, I think the thing, again, that's been probably the most profound to me of anything I've seen in quite a while was in the study where we showed very clearly, you know, we were able to affect ATP production levels inside cells from 7,000 miles away in a double-blinded fashion. The idea that there is this underlying intelligence and connectivity that in order for a double-blinded experiment to play out the way it did every single time has to be there. You know, the consciousness has to connect all things and all points at the base. We haven't yet done anything to modulate the frequencies. Like I said, we probably will do that with the wound healing before the end of the year to verify that and validate it. But what Philip is alluding to, right now, we're just showing data that says if you're supported by the quantum field, things function more effectively. Now, kind of like my analogy about, you know, Faraday looking at magnetism, what we're playing with is we've identified some precepts that we can use when we structure these experiments and say, okay, this is what we expect will happen at this rate, and we can even do an experiment with exposure to a quantum field and then exposure to a quantum field with a frequency added to it, and isolate that data. A year ago, we just didn't have the tool set, or, you know, the experience of having done it, failed, done it, got it to work, done it again, done it again, done it again, to validate what we're seeing. So we haven't done it yet. We certainly will. Again, like I said, definitively before the end of the year, I think we'll have that experiment done with wound healing to show the relative rates. But I think sometimes we kind of miss in my clique in science, kind of misses the more important thing of, oh my God, everything is connected. Every thought you have and every intention you express obviously has an impact. It's a waveform, and that waveform propagates, you know, albeit at a very small level, it still propagates and continues to move and send a ripple throughout everything all the time. So the biggest aha moment of the past year is kind of the thing that I would like to leave everybody with is we can definitively say all things are connected, and the intent that you express towards something, more likely than not, it is translating as some sort of vibratory field, but it's having an impact on everything else. So as you move through your day and your week and your month and your year, really be mindful of the idea that your thoughts and intentions are actually having an impact. You may not be seeing it, but they are definitively having an impact. So, be nice, be kind, be loving. It all makes a huge difference. So I will long digressive answer there, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the hippies in the 60s about good vibes were right. Right. I mean, these guys invented the good vibes thing.
True.
And how correct were they? It's amazing. But okay, so we've got multi-dimensional things going on. We've got the energy doing stuff. When you add frequency on it, you get even better results. You add intention, you get even better results. And we're learning as we're going. And thank you guys so much. It's just such a treat to have you two guys on. So I just want to say thank you so much. If you want to find, we'll reach out to Ian. You can find him at wizardsciences.com, and then you can find Philip at Leela Quantum Tech or Quantum Upgrade. And you can reach me at the Tinkers Academy. So again, gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I think everyone's going to find this discussion quite fascinating. So thank you, and aloha.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you,
Thanks,
Ian.
Kay.
That was great.
All right. You guys take care now.
Great to talk to you guys. All right. See you guys. Bye.
See you guys. Aloha.